The palace glimmered under twin moons, its spires reflecting the pale light like shards of glass. Yet no grandeur could hide the tension pulsing through the corridors. Princess Elira adjusted her robes, unaware that eyes trained sharper than any sensor were following her every step. The visitor, a human warrior named Cale Ardent, had arrived quietly, carrying no banners, no weapons visible, and yet the weight of his presence shifted the very air. Everyone assumed he was just another guard, another exotic curiosity from a distant planet. But the truth was far more dangerous and far more fascinating. Cale was not simply a soldier. He was a weapon, tempered by experience, instinct, and choice, a force that no alien council could fully predict or control. From the moment he stepped into the Grand Hall, he scanned every shadow, every glint of light, every pattern of movement. Courtiers paused mid-step, envoys faltered in conversation, and even the palace drones hesitated, as though sensing the ripple of calculated intent emanating from him. Elira, entirely unaware of his true nature, felt a curious pull toward him, and an inexplicable mixture of trust, intrigue, and caution. She had noticed the faint scars along his hands, the intensity in his gaze, the disciplined way he moved as though anticipating threats that didn't yet exist. It unnerved her, and yet it drew her closer. The first night in the palace was uneventful to anyone watching from the corridors, but Cale never slept. Every movement of the household, every pulse of energy through the walls, every whisper of air across the gardens was analyzed, catalogued, and prepared for potential danger. Elira strolled through the moonlit gardens, the alien flora brushing against her fingertips, and sensed Cale just a few steps behind, steady, alert, almost a part of the shadows themselves. She spoke without turning, her voice calm yet filled with curiosity. "Why are you always so close?" Cale's reply was measured, low, and deliberate. "Proximity allows me to intervene before danger manifests. Safety is not reaction, it is anticipation." There was a weight in his words, a subtle threat hidden beneath calm professionalism. He did not explain his origins, his training, or the full scope of his capabilities. And he never needed to. Action spoke louder than words, and within the palace, every silent step he took radiated a silent certainty. Nothing would reach her without his knowledge. The night deepened, and Elira finally stopped at a reflective pool, gazing at her own image in the rippling water. Cale remained behind her, silent, unwavering. "Who are you, really?" she asked softly, curiosity tinged with caution. "I am human," he replied simply. "I choose my actions, and I act with purpose. That is all you need to know." But that simple answer was anything but ordinary. Across the galaxy, intelligence networks had already begun to stir. Reports labeled him a strategic instrument, a term that failed to capture the lethal precision, the discipline, and the unpredictable potential contained within a single human being. Elira could sense it, too. There was something beyond his words, a depth she could not yet fathom, a power he had not yet revealed, and a suspense that clung to the air like electricity dot. And so the stage was set. An alien princess, unaware of the full magnitude of her protector's power, and a human warrior whose restraint and capability could topple empires if unleashed. Every corridor of the palace, every shimmering chamber, every diplomatic ceremony was now a theater of hidden tension, unseen calculations, and silent anticipation of the next unknown threat. Little did Elira know, Cale's presence was already changing the galaxy's perception of humanity, and it was only the beginning. Morning broke over the palace like a shard of light cutting through glass, yet nothing about the day promised normalcy. The corridors were alive with movement delegates discussing treaties, attendants gliding along in silent rhythm, but Cale Ardent moved differently. He was present yet unobtrusive, scanning, calculating, and shifting subtly to control every potential line of danger before it could manifest. Each micro-adjustment in his stance, each glance toward the shadows, radiated a quiet warning. Underestimate him at your peril. Princess Illyra walked alongside him, her curiosity mingling with the thrill of something unspoken. She had noticed it, the way he read intentions before words were spoken, how his body responded to threats unseen, how the air itself seemed to bend around him. She did not understand the depth of his abilities, yet she felt it intuitively. This human was extraordinary, far beyond the soldiers and mercenaries she had known. The first real test arrived silently. A ceremonial envoy from a distant star system arrived with their retinue, bringing gifts and subtle political undertones. Among them moved a saboteur, trained to infiltrate and destabilize alien courts, armed with microtech designed to avoid detection. No ordinary guards would have noticed the anomaly, but Kale did. His eyes flicked to the slight disturbance in the delegate's aura, the unnatural tension in their gait, and the faint energy fluctuations that whispered of danger. Without a sound, without drawing attention, he shifted imperceptibly, altering the flow of foot traffic, guiding the saboteur into a corner where their actions would be observed and nullified without exposure. The threat evaporated quietly, as if it had never existed. Observers later would record no anomaly. Only Illyra, walking beside him, knew the human had once again acted before danger had a chance to touch her. She glanced at him, curiosity and awe evident in her voice. How do you do it? How can you anticipate something no one else even notices? Kale's reply was calm, deliberate, and unsettlingly precise. Observation, calculation, anticipation. I intervene when outcomes become irreversible. What others call luck is simply preparation and timing. The simplicity of his words carried weight. There was no boast, no arrogance. There was only certainty absolute, measured, and terrifying in its implications. He could neutralize threats, control environments, and move unnoticed through chaos, and yet he chose restraint. That restraint made him human, yet deadly beyond comprehension. By midday, the palace staff had begun to sense the anomaly without knowing its source. Courtiers whispered of uncanny precision, of how incidents avoided catastrophe by a fraction of a second, and of how Kale's silent vigilance seemed to shape reality itself. Illyra, observing quietly, realized that she was no longer merely protected. She was influenced by his presence, guided instinctively through potential peril. She didn't fully perceive Dodd as they reached the grand observation deck. Overlooking the city below, Kale's attention never wavered. Shadows flickered, mechanical. Drones hovered, and distant surveillance probes scanned the palace exterior, yet none breached his perimeter. Even systems designed to alert to anomalies were recalculated in real time by his mere presence. He had become a living firewall, anticipating, neutralizing, and controlling outcomes without so much as raising a hand. Illyra's thoughts were a mix of fascination and unease. The human beside her was a mystery and enigma wrapped in discipline and lethal capability. She knew he was more than a guard, more than a soldier, more than a human. But how much more? That question lingered in the air, unanswered, as Kale's gaze extended toward the horizon, scanning beyond what anyone else could perceive. Ensuring her safety in silence, the day ended with no overt conflict, yet tension lingered like an electric charge. Kale's influence was invisible, yet absolute. And while the galaxy beyond the palace walls continued its ordinary politics, the presence of one human warrior, disciplined, precise, and silent, was already beginning to challenge every expectation anyone had ever held about humanity. The palace never truly rested. Even as night descended, its spires glowing softly under the twin moons, Kale remained vigilant. Every shadow, every faint whisper of movement, Every subtle vibration in the crystalline floors was catalogued, analyzed, and assessed. The human's presence was invisible to most, yet it reshaped the environment, bending probability around him to ensure that no harm reached Princess Illyra. The courtiers and attendants moved in careful rhythm, unconsciously aware of the invisible force that controlled the palace's safety without ever speaking a word. That evening, during a quiet walk through the palace's grand atrium, Illyra noticed the faintest anomaly, a reflection that moved contrary to the light, a shadow that lingered longer than it should. She sensed the shift in the air, subtle but disconcerting, and instinctively glanced at Kale. He was already observing, his posture calm, his eyes sharp, scanning every potential threat, every unseen deviation from order. A delegation from a neighboring system had arrived unannounced, their intentions cloaked in formal diplomacy. Yet the subtle undercurrent of danger was unmistakable to Kale. One of the delegates carried a concealed energy disruptor, capable of silently incapacitating anyone nearby. Automated defenses would not detect it. Guards would be helpless until it was too late. Kale needed only a moment to evaluate the risk, and then he acted with surgical precision. He stepped lightly, his movements fluid yet imperceptible. The disruptor, aimed at the princess, was intercepted mid-motion, deflected and neutralized without alarming anyone in the room. The envoy continued their polite conversation, oblivious to the intervention, while Illyra merely felt a reassuring presence beside her. Her curiosity burned, untempered by fear, as she whispered, "Kale, how did you know?" He did not answer with words. He simply adjusted his position, eyes scanning, always calculating. His silence was not indifference, it was control, restraint, and power hidden behind a calm facade. Every action he took was precise, yet invisible, preserving appearances while shaping outcomes in ways no one could predict. The palace sensors later recorded minor anomalies, but their data could not explain the exact timing or execution of the intervention. Analysts flagged the reports as unexplained interference, but no one could account for the fluidity and foresight demonstrated. Kale was already beyond their comprehension, an unpredictable variable in a galaxy accustomed to order and expectation. As the night deepened, Illyra walked along the balcony overlooking the city. She realized that Kale was more than a protector. He was an unseen force altering reality around her, a silent guardian whose discipline and restraint amplified his lethal capabilities. The city lights shimmered across canals of energy, and the cool night air carried a sense of latent power, both comforting and unsettling. The princess finally asked the question that had lingered for days. "Kale, who are you really?" He turned, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I am human. I act where others cannot. I endure what others fear. My purpose is to ensure your safety. That is all." Even as his words fell softly into the night, their weight lingered. They implied far more than he revealed: experience beyond memory, training beyond the ordinary, and instinct so precise it bordered on prescience. Illyra felt both awe and fear, curiosity and trust, and an unspoken understanding that her life had been irrevocably altered the moment Kale entered her world thought far beyond the palace walls. Intelligence networks were already adjusting calculations. Kale's actions, subtle yet decisive, had ripple effects that could not be contained. One human, disciplined, precise, and restrained, had demonstrated abilities that challenged centuries of assumptions about human capability. And the galaxy had no idea what was coming next. Dawn broke over the palace like molten silver, casting long, sharp shadows across the marble floors and crystalline spires. The city below stirred, unaware that one human warrior had already recalculated the flow of countless potential threats before the first light even touched the streets. Kale Arden moved with silent precision, his senses extended far beyond normal perception. Every footstep of attendants, every flicker of light, every distant hum of alien technology was catalogued, analyzed, and anticipated. To ordinary eyes, he appeared as a quiet companion to Princess Alira, a disciplined guard. But the truth was far more dangerous. The day's events began with a ceremonial welcome of foreign dignitaries. Courtiers lined the halls, their robes shimmering with exotic textiles, while Alira followed protocols with practiced grace. Yet, beneath the surface of diplomacy, subtle threats rippled like currents beneath calm water. Cale sensed them all. A misplaced glance, a hesitation in movement, the faint energy signature of a concealed device. It all registered instantly in his mind. He did not panic. He did not rush. He simply adjusted, a subtle shift of stance, a quiet repositioning, and the potential danger was neutralized before anyone else noticed. Alira observed him closely, curiosity mingled with unease. She had come to rely on his presence, to sense the invisible safety net he provided, yet she remained unaware of the full extent of his abilities. "Cale," she whispered during a brief pause, "how can you see so much, anticipate so perfectly, and never make a mistake?" His gaze met hers, steady and unwavering. Mistakes are avoided through observation, anticipation, and controlled action. I do not act without purpose, and I do not act for recognition. Even as his words fell softly into the ornate hall, their implication was profound. Cale did not merely protect. He controlled probabilities, manipulated environments, and neutralized threats in ways that ordinary beings could neither comprehend nor anticipate. He existed as a silent force, a pivot around which events subtly aligned to ensure her safety. Later, in the palace gardens, a subtle anomaly arose. The drone, cloaked in diplomatic insignia, attempted to approach undetected. Automated sensors failed to detect its presence, but Cale did. He moved swiftly, intercepting and disabling the device without a sound, without alerting the attendants, and without allowing Alira or anyone else to perceive the threat. It was as if the danger had never existed. Alira, oblivious to the precise mechanics of the intervention, felt only the calming certainty of Cale's presence. She realized she was in the company of someone extraordinary, a human whose discipline, restraint, and lethal potential were hidden beneath a veneer of composure. Every step he took, every micro-adjustment he made, radiated silent power. Meanwhile, the galactic intelligence networks were beginning to take notice. Reports of unexplained protective phenomena spread through data channels. Analysts attempted to model Cale's actions, but each calculation failed to predict the precision, timing, and subtle restraint he displayed. He was already beyond conventional comprehension, a human whose presence challenged the centuries of assumptions about the limits of his species. As evening approached, Alira stood on the balcony, gazing at the sprawling city below, the twin moons reflecting in her eyes. Cale remained behind her, vigilant, unassuming, yet omnipresent. She understood, in a way she could not fully articulate, that her life and perhaps the balance of power in the galaxy depended on the quiet decisions of this human warrior. The suspense lingered like a tangible force in the palace air. Cale's restraint, discipline, and precision were not just protective measures. They were a subtle warning to anyone who might underestimate humanity. The galaxy, vast and indifferent, was about to learn a lesson it had long ignored. The palace hummed with quiet activity as delegates from distant systems moved through corridors lined with crystalline panels and polished floors. Every reflection, every shifting light, every whispered conversation carried meaning, but Cale Arden moved as though none of it mattered, even while he registered it all. His eyes swept the room in calculated arcs, noting minute deviations, tiny anomalies, and potential threats invisible to everyone else. He was not just observing. He was anticipating, positioning, and controlling probabilities in real time. To the untrained eye, he was a silent human escort. To anyone with perception, he was a weapon cloaked in calm. Princess Alira walked beside him, her curiosity simmering beneath polite composure. She had begun to notice the subtleties, the way he shifted slightly when someone approached with ill intent, the tiny adjustments in his posture as he read hidden intentions, and the calm certainty that radiated from him like an aura. She did not yet know the full extent of his capabilities, but she instinctively trusted him. She had no reason to question the precision with which he navigated the palace or the invisible barriers he had already set in motion to safeguard her. That afternoon, during a formal assembly, a seemingly minor disturbance erupted. One of the alien delegates attempted a subtle act of sabotage, an energy disruptor hidden in an ornate gift box meant to incapacitate anyone near the princess. Automated detection systems failed to recognize the threat. Palace guards were oblivious. Only Kale perceived the danger, every sensor, instinct, and calculation converging instantly. He moved with fluid precision, intercepting the device mid-action and neutralizing it before it could cause harm. The delegates continued their formal proceedings, unaware of how close they had come to chaos. Alira, sensing a slight shift in the air, glanced at Kale. Her eyes widened slightly, and she whispered, "Kale, again? How do you always know?" He remained composed, voice calm and deliberate. "I see what others cannot. I act where others are blind. Timing and choice are all that matters. The outcome is controlled before it manifests." Even as he spoke, the implications were undeniable. Kale did not merely react. He reshaped reality in subtle ways to maintain order, safety, and advantage. Every calculated step was deliberate, yet invisible. Every action preserved appearances, maintaining the palace's calm while neutralizing threats before they could take shape. As the day progressed, a new tension emerged. Unseen intelligence networks and strategic observers across multiple systems began reporting anomalies. Incidents avoided at the last second, threats neutralized without explanation, and patterns of precision that defied conventional models. Analysts speculated, recalculated, and failed to predict outcomes, all while Kale moved silently, his presence alone bending probability in favor of survival. By evening, Alira found herself once again on the balcony, gazing at the vast cityscape. Beneath twin moons, Kale stood beside her, silent yet present, an unshakable anchor in a galaxy of uncertainty. She realized that his value extended far beyond mere protection. He was a pivot of power, a controlled weapon whose restraint made him more dangerous than any overt force. His influence extended invisibly, shaping outcomes without revealing the scope of his abilities. The human warrior's presence was a silent challenge to the galaxy's assumptions about humanity. One disciplined, precise, and controlled individual had already demonstrated a capacity beyond imagination, and the consequences of underestimating him were incalculable. Night settled over the palace like a heavy velvet curtain, but Kale Ardent did not rest. The halls were quiet, yet every shadow, every subtle flicker of light, every distant hum of machinery was alive to him. He moved through the corridors with silent precision, each step calculated, each motion controlled, ensuring that the princess remained untouched by threats that no one else could perceive. To the world, he was merely an escort. To anyone paying attention, he was the embodiment of lethal discipline and strategic foresight. Princess Alira, unaware of the full scope of his abilities, felt a quiet reassurance in his presence. She sensed the invisible boundaries he had already established, the safety net that stretched around her like a protective force field. It was both comforting and unnerving. Every instinct she had told her that Kale was no ordinary human, yet she lacked the comprehension to understand how far his abilities truly extended. Suddenly, A subtle disturbance rippled across the palace. An unregistered drone, cloaked to evade. The palace's automated defenses moved through the garden corridor. Its mission: to assess vulnerabilities and transmit data back to unknown enemies. Kale noticed the anomaly instantly. He did not hesitate. With precise movements, he intercepted the drone, neutralizing it without so much as a flicker of sound or alert. The mission failed without anyone noticing, and the attackers remained oblivious to the human who had already outmaneuvered them. Alira turned to him, curiosity laced with awe. "You always know what's coming. How do you see everything before it happens?" Cal's gaze remained steady, unwavering. "It is observation, calculation, and anticipation. I do not act blindly. I control outcomes before they reach you. That is all you need to know." The simplicity of his answer belied the truth. Every subtle movement he made, every decision, every micro-adjustment shaped reality around him. He was not only a guardian. He was a silent manipulator of probability, a human whose discipline and foresight defied understanding. Elsewhere in the galaxy, intelligence networks began picking up patterns. Reports of near misses, neutralized threats, and inexplicable precision started circulating among military analysts. Simulations failed. Algorithms failed. Observers debated whether Kale was enhanced, genetically modified, or something entirely beyond comprehension. One thing became clear: he was an unpredictable variable that could not be modeled out. As the night deepened, Kale escorted Alira to a secluded tower chamber overlooking the city. The twin moons bathed the spires in silver light, and the air shimmered with latent energy. She turned to him, her voice low and tentative. "Kale, do you ever fear anything?" He did not flinch. "Fear is irrelevant when preparation and choice govern action. I act where others cannot. I endure what others avoid. That is my strength, and my restraint ensures it is never misused." Alira felt a mixture of awe, respect, and an unexplainable attachment. He was a warrior unlike any she had encountered, a protector whose silent control extended far beyond the limits of ordinary perception. She realized, in that moment, that the human beside her was not only guarding her life, he was shaping the fate of everyone around him, his influence invisible yet absolute. The suspense hung in the palace air like an electric charge. Kale's restraint, skill, and foresight were not just protective. They were an unspoken warning. Humanity was underestimated, and one disciplined warrior had already begun to rewrite the rules of what was possible. The following day began under an unusual tension that even the palace staff could feel. Kale moved silently through the grand halls, his every sense alert to anomalies that others would dismiss as coincidences. Delegates, envoys, and dignitaries continued their formalities, unaware that one human's presence alone had already neutralized dangers they could not perceive. Kale's vigilance was absolute, and the calm exterior of the palace belied the invisible web of control he had woven. Around it, Princess Alira observed him more closely than ever. She noticed the subtle shifts in his posture when a shadow lingered too long, the way his eyes tracked distant reflections, the almost imperceptible adjustments in the way he positioned himself between her and the unknown. She had come to rely on him, though she still did not understand the full magnitude of his abilities. Every step Kale took ensured not just her safety, but the smooth continuation of events that would otherwise have spiraled into chaos. That afternoon, an unexpected message arrived from a neighboring system, delivered by a courier whose credentials seemed legitimate at first glance. Kale intercepted it silently, noting anomalies in the handwriting, the paper, and the energy signatures embedded. In the seal, the missive contained subtle threats, attempts at manipulation, and even coded instructions meant to destabilize the palace from within. He neutralized the potential breach immediately, redirecting the courier without arousing suspicion, ensuring that Alira would never even glimpse the danger that had passed her by. The princess, sensing a slight shift in the atmosphere, asked softly, "Kale, how do you know when something is wrong?" "I never see it coming." He did not answer directly. Instead, he observed, calculated, and remained a silent presence. Actions, not words, conveyed the truth. Kale was a weapon trained in restraint, a human whose mastery of anticipation and control allowed him to act with precision that seemed supernatural. He did not need to explain. His presence alone was a guarantee of safety. As the day wore on, Kale's vigilance extended beyond the palace walls. Reports from surveillance drones, sentries, and intelligence networks were cross-referenced in his mind in real time. He predicted potential breaches, assessed weaknesses in the security infrastructure, and subtly adjusted patrols without anyone noticing. No threat, whether subtle or overt, could bypass him. By evening, Alira realized that her life within the palace was no longer defined by conventional security. She was shielded not only by walls, guards, and technology, but by Kale himself, a human warrior whose awareness, discipline, and restraint turned the unpredictable into the controlled. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, and this single human had already begun to prove why that was a dangerous mistake. The night closed in around the palace, shadows stretching across the corridors, yet Kale remained alert, ever-present, a silent sentinel ready for whatever threat might arise. In that quiet vigilance lay the truth. He was not merely a protector. He was an agent of subtle power, a variable the galaxy could not predict, a force capable of reshaping events before anyone else even realized danger existed. The palace awoke to a day unlike any other, its halls bustling with diplomats, merchants, and envoys from systems far beyond the galaxy's central reach. Kale Arden moved among them with silent precision, an unassuming shadow that bent the flow of events without drawing attention. Every gesture, every glance, every subtle shift in his posture carried the weight of unspoken calculations. To those around him, he appeared as nothing more than a disciplined human companion to Princess Alira. But in truth, he orchestrated an invisible symphony of anticipation and control. The princess herself had begun to notice the difference. Where others relied on protocol, on sensors, or on guards, Kale relied on instinct sharpened to a deadly edge. He could read subtle cues in body language, detect faint energy signatures invisible to technology, and predict intentions before they fully materialized. Alira could not see the precision, the forethought, or the lethal restraint in his movements, but she could feel it. It was a presence that both comforted and unnerved her, a quiet force that protected her from dangers she could not perceive. Midday brought a subtle ripple of chaos. A disguised emissary attempted to smuggle a weapon into the palace's ceremonial chamber. The device was small, sleek, and engineered to bypass detection systems. Palace guards would have failed to notice it until it was too late. Kale, however, perceived the anomaly instantly. Without sound, without drawing attention, he intercepted the emissary, neutralized the device, and subtly redirected the intruder. The entire episode passed unnoticed by everyone but Kale and, faintly, Alira, who felt only a subtle sense of calm as the tension dissipated. Alira turned to him quietly as they walked along the atrium. "Kale, it's like nothing can reach me when you're near. How do you do it?" Kale's reply was measured, controlled, and deliberate. Observation, anticipation, and decisive action. I move before danger manifests. Preparation is the only certainty in an uncertain world. Every word carried weight, yet the truth of his abilities was far deeper than his explanation. Kale did not simply protect. He manipulated probability, preempted chaos, and neutralize threats before they had a chance to form. His restraint was as dangerous as his capability. It was proof that humanity's potential had been underestimated and that a single disciplined warrior could alter outcomes on a scale that few could comprehend as evening approached. Kale escorted Alira to a secluded terrace overlooking the city. The lights of distant spires glimmered like stars on the horizon, and the twin moons cast their pale reflection across the polished floors. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, as though the palace itself had learned to move in rhythm with Kale's vigilance. Every shadow, every flicker of movement, every distant sound was accounted for and silently neutralized. Alira realized that her perception of safety had been forever changed. She was protected not merely by walls or guards, but by an unseen force, Kale himself. A human warrior, disciplined beyond measure, precise beyond imagination, and restrained enough to remain unseen while exercising absolute control over his environment. The palace had become an invisible stage upon which Kale's quiet mastery orchestrated every outcome, bending events towards safety and stability without ever revealing the full magnitude of his abilities. By the time night fell, the princess understood one immutable truth. Her life, her future, and the delicate balance of power within the palace depended upon the human at her side. And while she could not yet comprehend the full scale of his power, the galaxy was already beginning to take notice of a species it had long underestimated. Humanity had arrived. The final day of the ceremonial week arrived under a sky painted with hues of violet and gold. The palace was alive with delegations, emissaries, and observers from countless systems. Yet Kale Arden moved as always with silent, precise intent. He had already anticipated every potential threat, redirected every subtle hazard, and positioned himself to neutralize dangers before anyone could detect them. To the world, he was a mere companion to Princess Alira. In reality, he was the invisible fulcrum upon which the safety of the entire palace rested. The princess walked beside him, her awareness heightened, her instincts sharpened by days spent observing the subtle mastery of this human warrior. She had begun to sense the magnitude of Kale's abilities, though she could never have imagined the depth of his precision, the quiet lethality, or the extent of his control over events. Even the smallest anomaly shifts in energy fields. The subtle tremor of hidden mechanisms were detected and countered before they could affect her. During a grand assembly, an envoy from a distant system attempted to destabilize the proceedings. Hidden within a ceremonial gift was a micro-disruptor designed to incapacitate anyone within the room. Automated sensors would have failed. Guards would have been powerless until it was too late. Kale, however, had already detected the irregularity moments after it entered the chamber. With fluid motion and silent precision, he intercepted the device, neutralized the threat, and ensured the envoy remained oblivious to their failure. The event proceeded without incident, a seamless illusion of peace and order maintained entirely by his unseen hand. Alira, sensing the invisible intervention, finally asked, her voice tinged with awe, "Kale, who taught you to be this? How can one human do so much?" Kale's gaze met hers, calm and unwavering. "I am no one special, Princess. I have observed, trained, and endured. I act where others cannot, and I ensure outcomes before danger manifests. That is all." Even as he spoke, the truth resonated far beyond his words. Kale was more than a protector. He was an agent of change, a silent force capable of shaping events on a scale that challenged centuries of assumptions about humanity. His restraint made him unpredictable. His discipline made him lethal. His presence ensured that the impossible became possible. As night fell, the palace lights reflected across the city like rivers of liquid silver. Alira stood on the highest balcony, watching the twin moons glimmer, Aware now that her safety and the delicate balance of the palace rested entirely in the hands of one extraordinary human, she realized that Chael's power, hidden though it was, had irrevocably altered her perception of what humanity could achieve. Beyond the palace walls, whispers of Chael's actions had begun to spread. Analysts, spies, and strategists across the galaxy were starting to question everything they thought they knew about humans. One disciplined, precise, and restrained warrior had already demonstrated capabilities beyond imagination. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, and Chael Arden was the proof of a species capable of far more than anyone dared to imagine. As the princess turned to leave the balcony, Chael remained ever vigilant, a silent sentinel whose presence had rewritten the rules of engagement and expectation. The palace was secure, the threats neutralized, and the galaxy itself had received its first glimpse of what one human could accomplish when trained, disciplined, and restrained to perfection. This was only the beginning. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to follow the full adventures of Chael Arden and see how humanity continues to surprise the galaxy.